Hello class, this is CSE-4400, Section 1, Week 11, Fall 2025. In this chapter we're going to talk about gameplay. So, very early on in the course we looked at the definition of gameplay. Gameplay is defined as the challenges presented to the player by the game and the actions the player can perform to overcome those challenges. This does not include the definition of fun because fun is hard to define. Because what's fun to one player may not necessarily be fun to another player. And remember, the goal of a game, for our purposes, the goal of a game is to provide entertainment, which is done through gameplay. The goal of a game designer is to entertain a player. Entertainment is easier to find than fun is, but most games concentrate on delivering fun. And execution matters more than innovation. If you can get it right, then you've done something right. Most of what makes a game fun has nothing to do with imagination or creativity, but rather it avoids things that aren't fun. So consider the following factors from least important to most important. So avoid elementary errors, like errors in the art, the sound, the UI, for example. Those are the most important things you will ever do. And part of that is because people are going to notice the graphics. People are going to notice whether your graphics are bad. Tuning and polishing is the second most important thing. That means paying attention to detail, getting everything perfect. This is something that you get to do in the polishing stage of your development. Imaginative variations of the game's premise contribute to the player's fun, taking the basic elements of a game and making an enjoyable experience out of them. True innovations are like 5% of the source of a game's fun. Design innovation encompasses the game's original idea and subsequent creative decisions you make. And then, the fun. The smallest and most mysterious part of the fun in a game, it's impossible to describe. You can't make it happen, but you know it's there. Innovation is only a small part of the fun of a game, but building a game still requires someone there to design it and to design it well. You can think of a design for a building, and there are several buildings. I have seen several buildings be built throughout my time at Cal State San Bernardino. First it was CGI, and then the commons and dorms, and then it was CGI in the commons and dorms, and then the new student union building, and then a new theater for the arts department, I think. An architect may have an idea for all of those, but it's gonna require essentials that many people may find boring. HVAC, plumbing, etc. Making sure those buildings are up to code in case an earthquake hits, because California is earthquake land, and Cal State San Bernardino is suspiciously close to the San Andreas Fault. Anyway, much of the work in constructing a building goes into creating those mundane but essential things, and the same is true for game design. There isn't a formula for making a game fun, but there are a few principles you can keep in mind, such as gameplay comes first. Have something fun for your player to do. Otherwise, what's the point of playing the game? Get a feature right or leave it out. If you have an idea for a feature, but you are struggling to get it to work, stop wasting time trying to get it to work, cut it out, and maybe one day you can find time to add it back in as a version 2 of your game. At the same time, you want something fun in your game, but you don't want to bog yourself down with more work than what's necessary to get your game to be at least minimum viable product. Gameplay comes first. Have something fun for your player to do. Get a feature right or leave it out. A missing feature shows a design decision. A broken feature shows incompetence and it destroys fun. Also design around the player. This is player-centric game design. Know your target audience. It's hard to make a game that appeals to a broad audience than it is to appeal to a niche market. Either way, Don't assume you know everything that your audience likes already, and that's why you do playtesting. Be true to your vision. Don't add irrelevant things for the sake of attracting a larger audience. Also, strive for harmony, elegance, and beauty. The lack of aesthetic perfection doesn't take the fun out of a game, but rather diminishes the fun. If you can make it work and look good, that's good. Okay, now we get to this part of our discussion, the hierarchy of challenges. Doesn't matter what game you play, there is always going to be some sort of, well, for all, but maybe the most simplest games, there is going to be some hierarchy of challenges. Maybe it's a game where you have to defeat Ganondorf. And that is the highest level challenge in the context of most Zelda games out there. Defeat Ganon/Ganondorf. That is your highest level challenge, and that challenge is composed of smaller challenges, and those challenges are composed of even smaller challenges, and those challenges are composed of even smaller challenges, and those challenges are composed of even smaller challenges, and those challenges are... Anyway, at some point we're gonna get to the smallest possible challenge. But before we get to that, a game may even have optional challenges. Challenges that are not necessary to surmounting the biggest challenge of a game, but rather optional challenges that may be fun just for the sake of having something to do. It's often said that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom both reward the player for getting sidetracked. Like, you see something interesting, ooh, what's that? And then you just wander off, and now you've diverted from your main challenge, but you got something cool along the way. So, challenges are composed of smaller challenges, and those challenges are composed of smaller challenges. All the way down, we get to the atomic challenges. These are the smallest possible challenges in a video game. These challenges are combined together, these atoms are combined together to make larger challenges, and then those combinations of challenges combine to make even larger challenges. You can even break them up into missions if you need to. Depending on the nature of your game, you may need to pair them into missions. So a mission is its own challenge, which has its own set of smaller challenges. And maybe that mission is required to beat, maybe beating that mission is needed to beat the next challenge, and beating that is required to beat the next challenge after that. Whatever that structure is, you as a game designer are the one making this hierarchy of challenges. During play, the player focuses on the atomic challenges, with the higher level challenges somewhere in the back of the player's mind. This creates anticipation that entertains the player and guides the player to victory. The player knows that they eventually need to defeat Ganon/Ganondorf. But maybe they're not feeling up to it yet, so they go off and do some optional challenge just to get them ready for it. And maybe along the way, they surmount another challenge that they were also scared to pull off, and they beat it. There are two types of challenges in a game. The first one are explicit challenges. These are challenges that are told by the game. They are told to the player by the game directly. These are explicit challenges. Implicit challenges are unstated challenge, and the players must figure out how to do them. Examples of explicit challenges include pressing a button to climb on a cliff surface. Get to this specific location in game. Pick up an item from the ground. How to walk. How to jump. How to climb. How to move the camera. These are explicit challenges, and in this case, they also may be atomic challenges. If the goals of what to do are stated clearly in the game, they are explicit challenges. If a game tells you what to do, but it does not tell you how to do it, those are implicit challenges. So an explicit challenge might be, press this button to pick up the stick on the ground. But an implicit challenge would be, cross this river to open the treasure chest that's on the other side of the river. There may be several different ways to get to that treasure chest, but the game makes no distinction over which method is preferred. That's an implicit challenge. You as a player must figure out how to get to the other side of the river. Video games generally give instructions on what to do at the lowest and highest levels of the hierarchy, but never in the middle, and that's done for a few reasons that I'll get into in a little bit. Many games tell the player what the end goal is to make sure what should be accomplished. Also, many games also feature tutorial levels to show the player how to meet the game's atomic challenge, how to climb, how to pick up items, how to move, how to walk. Also, you should always tell the player what the victory condition is, otherwise they don't know what they're accomplishing. But it does not apply to storytelling games. You can keep some things a surprise, and you can also go as far as to introduce a plot twist, but too many plot twists might be overkill, and it might just get the player to think you're just being lied to. Okay, so intermediate challenges. So we have the atomic challenges at the bottom, the game's biggest challenge at the top, and in the middle we have all of these intermediate challenges. They are usually implicit challenges because if they were instead explicit challenges, then the game feels more like a test. Also, that's reason number one. The other reason is it's just more fun for the player to figure out what to do. And with that in mind, the player can then meet the game's intermediate challenges. Many games have the player work on challenges in sequence, do this challenge, and then after that, you unlock the next challenge, and the next one after that. In action games, the challenges may be beat all the enemies and pass all obstacles to beat a level, and then beat all levels to finish the game. They can also be in sequence. For complex games, the player may have several ways to approach an intermediate challenge. Just look at how people beat the shrines in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. If we applied the previous challenge, beat all the enemies, to a war game, the enemy will just end up producing new enemies to beat. So the strategy of beat all the enemies and to pass the level doesn't work if the enemy has a way to create new mobs to kill. It's at the point that you want to start thinking about different strategies to try to beat this level. Maybe you want to go on the attack. Depending on the game, you might have to instead attack the enemy's production system. Now we're talking about StarCraft. Or maybe you can build up your own forces and just go in brute force. That can also work. All the while, you must also protect your own systems. As a game designer, you design the implicit challenges for the player to figure out. And if there's more than one way to meet a challenge, reward victory to the player no matter how it's achieved. No matter how ridiculous it is. Also, sometimes some games may give the player multiple atomic challenges to surmount. Maybe a game spawns multiple enemy types and the player must dodge all shots from those different enemy types. As a game designer, you also decide how many challenges the player will face at once, which may or may not jive well with your particular target audience. But again, that's why you offer playtesting. Now we get to skill, stress, and absolute difficulty. So, skill, or rather intrinsic skill required, is one of two factors that determines the absolute difficulty of a challenge. The other one is stress. These aren't the only ones, and the others are covered in Chapter 15. Intrinsic skill required by a challenge is defined as the level of skill needed to surmount a challenge if the player had unlimited time to do that challenge. So if you can imagine a boss battle, but you turned off all the AI for the boss, now it's a matter of, can the player deal enough damage to that boss in time? Also, if there is a countdown timer for that boss, you would also turn that off. Now, you are determining whether the player is defeating that boss in a reasonable amount of time. If it's taking a long time, then that's an issue with the player's equipment, for example. How we measure intrinsic skill will also vary by the type of challenge, and it can involve physical tasks, mental tasks, or both. Archery, for example, takes a certain amount of skill to hit a target, and more time to aim if the target is any farther. So, time doesn't change the amount of skill required. Printed Sudoku puzzles. So the difficulty of Sudoku puzzles in general is determined by how many or how few given clues there are. A trivia game tests a player's knowledge. The skill required doesn't change if the player has more time to answer. And now stress. Stress is what you get when you introduce time pressure to surmount a challenge. Consider Pokemon Go. You have these Pokemon raids, and you go in with yourself and or a group of multiple players to take down a boss Pokemon within a certain time limit. The skill here, the amount of skill needed to do that is determined by, well, how hard can you hit? Imagine if you can go into a test world for a Pokemon boss, and you go in and you take down the health of this boss Pokemon, and it takes a few hours to do it. The issue there is you're not dealing enough damage, and that's a skill issue that can be resolved by going in with more powerful Pokemon, and also also keeping in mind the type matchups so you know which type deals more damage to another. If you do that, and you're still getting defeated, then the skill issue there is you're not going in with enough people. Because a Pokemon raid has a time limit. The goal is to defeat the Pokemon in time. Less time means more stress. But I guess in the case of the Pokemon example, the example of Pokemon Go, more stress. Less people also means more stress. Also, games can create physical stress on the player's body. Look up all those live streams of people who connect heart monitors on themselves. And for some streamers, they take it up to the extreme. So, the higher their heart rate, the more danger the game has. So, this may and may not be good for your player either. It's for this reason that it's also a good idea to vary the pacing of your game, so your players have time to relax. Some players love the sensation of high stress, but not everyone does. When you play test, you gotta make sure what is an acceptable level of stress for your players. And now we talk about absolute difficulty. It's intrinsic skill plus stress. When deciding how difficult you want your game to be, think about skill and stress. Also, different age groups have different tolerances for stress. If the player can set difficulty level, which is an easy way to cater to different people of your game, having different difficulty levels. If the player can set difficulty level, try to preserve the following inverse relationship. More skill requires more time to perform, and vice versa. So here is a list of commonly used challenges. These aren't top level challenges, but rather they are lower level, possibly atomic challenges. Use this info to think about what challenges you want for your game. So, you have physical coordination challenges, which commonly test players' hand-eye coordination. Absolute difficulty of such challenges frequently relates to the player's time pressure. Again, less time means more stress. So conversely, more time equals less stress. Challenges include speed and reaction time. Think of Tetris, first-person shooters, and fast-paced puzzle games like Tetris, Team Fortress 2, Osu. Accuracy and shooting. Basically any game that has you firing a gun or a bow and arrow or any other ranged weapon you can think of. Intuitive understanding of physics. So any game that has a physics engine, like Angry Birds. that might also go hand in hand with the accuracy and precision thing. If you're launching things like in Angry Birds, timing and rhythm, dodging attacks from enemies and performing the right move at the right time. This might sound like rhythm games, but they might also apply to combat in other games. So that's why I put down as examples Dance Dance Revolution, Guitar Hero, and Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Combination moves, performing a sequence of inputs that result in the player performing a more powerful move. Again, these examples may also fit. Okay, so logic and math puzzles. So for logic, this is the basis of strategic thinking as seen in turn-based games. For math, in the broadest sense, such challenges are found in games that include numeric relationships, and such challenges are usually implicit. Formal logic puzzles, these are your classic deductive logic puzzles, where the definition of the puzzle, which only contains one solution, contains or explains everything needed to solve it. Reasoning alone should be enough to solve it. No outside help should be necessary. Such puzzles present the player with a collection of objects that are related to one another but not directly obvious. The player has to reason what those items do and then put them in an arrangement that constitutes the solution. Like a Rubik's Cube. Yeah, it takes quite a bit of reasoning to figure out what moves do what to a Rubik's Cube. But when you sit down and think about it, when you perform such moves, you find that certain pieces move or get flipped around. That's the reasoning part of solving a Rubik's Cube. For logic puzzles, avoid trial and error. Most logic puzzles require some experimentation, but the player should be able to make deductions from those. If a puzzle is only trial and error, then the game becomes more frustrating. Math puzzles, basically challenges like that, usually require the player to reason about probabilities, like poker and craps, but also math puzzles. Races and time pressure. You probably know what a race is. Complete some goal before someone else does, either another player or an AI agent in your game. Recall that time pressure increases stress, and that stress also affects strategic thought. Adding time pressure to challenges that don't have time constraints may make it needlessly difficult. If you add time pressure, you may need to decrease the amount of intrinsic skill needed. So, imagine a challenge in a video game where you have to scan a ID card in the right way. That's not stressful at all. But it may be stressful if that card reader is programmed to be finicky and you have to swipe it the right way to get it to scan properly. If you want time pressure, imagine some eldritch horror is catching up to you and you need to open the door so you can get in. Factual knowledge challenges. We're talking about game shows here. Such challenges are typical of trivia and quiz games. They can either test the player's factual knowledge from outside the game, or they can test the player's knowledge from when inside the game. Memory challenges. Such challenges test the player's ability to recall seen or heard things from the game. So many RPGs may include puzzles, and they may be memory challenges, like memorizing the sequence of a pattern of blinking lights. Pattern recognition challenges, we're talking about games that may be within the realm of those match 3 games, such as Candy Crush, Bejeweled, or maybe other games where you have to figure out a specific pattern to the background to see whether there's a hidden door. Exploration challenges. Exploration's often its own reward. Players like to move around and see new things. There must be a challenge to exploration, or else it just becomes sightseeing. So consider adding obstacles that make players earn the freedom of exploration. And an easy way to do that is this. In some games, you have to unlock certain areas, but when you do, you basically have unlocked the right to explore that area. Or maybe some areas might be inaccessible because you don't have the right ability, and you have to earn that ability to access that area. Exploration challenges include spatial awareness challenges, where the player is in an unfamiliar area and they must find their way around. You can reduce difficulty by adding a map, but if you feel like that makes the challenge too easy, you can add the map but don't show where the player is. Locked doors. Any door that requires a key or has some obstruction in the way to be removed. I would add on to that any areas in your game that are inaccessible until you have the means of accessing it. Like, there's a chasm that you have to jump over, but you can't jump far enough. Traps. Devices that, when triggered, inconvenience, harm, or kill the player. Can encourage an alternate route by discouraging going down a particular path, or maybe circumvented before proceeding. Having too many traps may be too much trial and error for the player. Also, traps become more fun if the player can find a way to outwit them. Mazes and illogical spaces. Mazes require the player to navigate an area, and without any clues, the maze becomes trial and error. There is a heuristic that you can use to navigate a maze, and that's just basically follow where your right hand is, for example. Illogical spaces include areas that don't relate to one another in a way that the player expects. For example, the Stanley Parable has a scene where you have these two hallways, where you look down one hallway and it keeps going in one direction, but you look down another hallway and it also keeps going down in one direction, but you see them and they're supposed to intersect, but they don't. Such phenomenon are generally called non-Euclidean geometry. I'm not sure if that's the right word for it though, but it definitely does not make sense at all. Teleporters. Devices that suddenly transport the player to a known or unknown location, which can be used for quick travel. Oftentimes, teleporters are for quick travel. You can also add teleporters to a space to make travel more unpredictable. Finding hidden objects, which is its own challenge. Sometimes those hidden objects can be Easter eggs. Conflict. Not to be confused with a conflict of interest. Such challenges requires direct opposition of forces, some of which under the player's control. So maybe it's a war game and you have to face off an enemy opponent. Also, such challenges aren't necessarily violent, though opposing enemy forces does count as conflict. Create interesting conflict challenges by considering the following factors: the scale of the action, from individuals to whole armies, the speed at which the conflict takes place, from turn-based to frenetic activity in action games, and the complexity of the victory conditions, from simple survival to complex goals and sub-goals in a mission. And here's a few more things to keep in mind: strategy, tactics, logistics, survival and reduction of enemy forces, defending vulnerable items or units, and stealth. These are different things you can have as part of your conflict challenge. Economic challenges. In the broadest sense, an economy in a game is a system in which money or some other resource moves from one owner to another owner. The most simplest economy you will ever see in any game is basically a shopkeeper. You have money and then you exchange that for goods and services. These can also be combined with other challenges, such as those conflict and exploration challenges. Slice grass and you get rupees out of it. There are a few economic challenges that are all... The first one is accumulation of resources, which is self-explanatory, though resources can be simply money or points. Achieving balance, that's a bit more complex. Maybe you have a factory, maybe you've seen this in factory management games, but you have several systems that are meant to be self-regulating. Maybe you have one system that produces iron ore mined from a resource in the game, and then you have some other system that processes those ingots, processes that iron into ingots, and maybe you have a few other systems that turns those ingots into other resources that you can use as part of expanding your factory. All the while, you also have a power system that generates power as needed, but there's also a battery buffer that you have to top off as needed. So all of these systems are basically, you have to find a balance so that way the whole system works without your input. Maybe that power system is powered by a biomass generator and that's connected to a resource farm where you have to convert plant material into biofuel that you power your power generators with that supplies power to your iron processing factory. The challenge here is balancing production and consumption. That is its own challenge that some people find fun. Also, another economic challenge stated in the book, caring for living things, common in games that simulate life or caring for a pet. Conceptual reasoning and lateral thinking puzzles, both types of challenge require extrinsic knowledge from outside the game. For comparison, formal logic puzzles don't require outside knowledge. Okay, actions. So, a game has challenges that the player must surmount. A game also has actions that the player can do. Actions refer to events in the game world caused directly by the user interface interpreting a player input. Think of actions as the verbs of your game. The player can jump, the player can slash, the player can walk. If something happens because of an action, that's an event, not an action. The player can swing a sword, and then that causes leaves and bugs to fall out of a tree. That is an event because it isn't directly caused, because it's indirectly caused by the player. The player doesn't make the tree drop bugs and such. The player swings a sword that then causes leaves and bugs to fall out of the tree. Unlike challenges, there is no hierarchy of actions. Rather, actions are described using level terms, as actions are typically the results of players pressing keyboard keys or controller buttons. Also, it doesn't help to have a high-level action such as defeat the boss monster. It doesn't help you, the game designer, and it doesn't help the player either. Having a defeat the monster button trivializes the entire challenge and the player learns nothing. Rather, defeat the boss monster, that's broken up into simpler actions: move, kick, jump, dodge, throw, slash, fire, etc. And it's up to the player to figure out which actions defeats the boss monster. Most actions are meant for the player to meet the challenges of a game. They can be simple or abstract. Because of this, there is no way to comprehensively list all possible actions in a video game. However, your choice of interaction model will determine what kinds of actions your video game will require. So if you have Zoo Tycoon 2, for example, the player can move around this 3D space. It's a multi-present interaction model. The player can select buildings, select animals, select zoo guests, select employees. The player can also move employees around. The player can also demolish buildings. The player can also move animals around. The player can also build fences. The player can also construct pathways. Those are the actions the player can do in Zoo Tycoon 2. Also, don't expect a one-to-one mapping between actions and challenges. Many games have more challenges than there are actions, and the number of actions is often limited. And this is done for two reasons. More actions requires more buttons, which may require a larger user interface. Also, more actions may require more animations. Early on, you may have had to answer the question, what is the player going to do? This was asked back at the concept stage of your game, and was answered using general questions. After that, go into detail what actions the player does for each gameplay mode. Like, for example, if you're making a game and the primary gameplay mode is driving a car, what actions are needed to do that? Press the accelerator, turn the steering wheel, shift gears, adjust the mirror, honk the horn. Next, look at the challenges designed for each gameplay mode. Maybe in that game where you're driving a car, the challenge is to make a delivery. Maybe the challenge is to get to a delivery point within a certain amount of time. Write down the atomic challenges you plan to offer and how they should be overcome. After that, you can move on to the higher level challenges. Once you've defined those actions, then you can consider actions related not related to gameplay. Honking the horn, for example. Petting the dog, for example. You would have to repeat this for each gameplay mode your game has. So actions that serve other functions include unstructured play, fun to perform actions that don't address any challenge, actions for creation and self-expression, see Chapter 9, actions for socialization that may involve Chapter 17 for online interaction, actions to participate in the story, and actions to control the game software, such as changing the volume. Now we talk about saving the game. That basically saves the game's current state and the player's data, including customizations, so the player can just really reload them at a later time. Obvious reasons include allowing the player to take a break, and also letting the player recover from a disastrous mistake, and also encouraging the player to explore alternate strategies in a game. There's some consequences for immersion and storytelling as well. Saving a game generally requires the player to perform an action that breaks immersion, and it's not always beneficial. Also, in some games, the player can just save scum a save until they get the right or desired outcome. This nullifies cause and effect in itself. If there's no consequences for the player's action, there's no consequences for a player's action if they can just rewind to a previous save. But the benefits of saving generally outweigh the disadvantages. Ways of saving the game include level access codes. For older games, this may have been the only way to save a game because limited storage. Saving to a save slot, that's more common. Quick save and auto save and checkpoints. Quick save, pressing a button that automatically saves your game without having to break immersion, and auto save, that does not break immersion at all because, well, it's automatic and it happens in the background. The game is saved at regular intervals or at other important times. To save or not to save. Some devs disallow saving, either within certain areas or at all. So this is an argument to discourage saving. If the player can save and reload anything, the player can try again on certain challenges or avoid the consequences of a bad decision. So that's one argument to discourage saving. However, the author calls this lazy game design. It adds more difficulty without adding fun. So as a design rule, unless there are space restrictions, allow the player to save and reload. When it comes to game design, there are design rules and then there are things that basically break those rules. So even though I'm talking about game design as a set of rules, sometimes there are exceptions to those rules that sometimes work better. I'm talking about games that don't allow you to save at all. And by extension, I'm talking about games that you can only play once. And maybe you've seen such games too. Games where you can only play the game once, and whatever decisions you have made, you must live with them. At least until you find where the save file lives and reset it. Despite the design challenges described, these games are enhanced by the lack of normal save mechanics. This is done to increase the gravity of a player's choice. Once a decision is made, there is no turning back. It is possible to play such games more than once, but it involves finding where the save data lives and deleting it from there. There are a few such games, such as this browser game called One Chance. Whatever choices you make, they are permanent, until you reset your browser's history. There's a more famous game that I just forgot existed just this year, called One Shot. The original freeware edition could only ever be played once. The Steam version has normal save mechanics. Oh yeah, and regarding saving as an action that breaks immersion, not always. Such games such as Hollow Knight have a save mechanic that keeps the player immersed. It's no different from an autosave mechanic, but this is just a different experience from your typical autosave mechanic. Okay, so that's gonna be it on our discussion on Chapter 13. You have an upcoming Checkpoint 2 and a game design document second submission. I still don't have the rubric for that, so that's gonna have to come in this weekend. It's gonna be a little bit awkward for checkpoint number 2 because there is no class on Tuesday, so you're gonna have to log in on Zoom on Thursday. So that's gonna be it for this video. I'm gonna have to post the rubric sometime this weekend. When I do, I'll notify the whole class, hey, here's your rubric, and here's instructions for your checkpoint 2. Alright, that's gonna be it for this, and I guess I'll see you next week.